Okay, let's get started. Hello everyone, my name is Brian Puente. I support Adobe Creative Cloud at the University of Arizona, and today I would like to talk to you a bit about Illustrator. So the workshop that we had scheduled for today was image tracing with Illustrator. So what image tracing allows us to do is it allows us to take any photo that we have and then create vector artwork from it, which has some really cool results. On top of talking about image tracing, I also want to just talk about some of the basics of Illustrator so that you're familiar with the types of things you can add maybe to your image tracings to make them better than just the default options that the application gives you. So with that said, we're going to go ahead and get started and just jump right into Illustrator. And if you have any questions as we go along, please leave them in the chat. I'll do my best to answer them, and we'll take it from there. Great. So let's go ahead and jump into Illustrator. We'll just kind of get cracking right away. So when we first open Illustrator, I have a few project files I'm going to be working with here today, but let me go ahead and show you what the start screen looks like from here. So when you first start using Illustrator, you're going to be greeted with this dialog box here, and there's quite a bit going on, but it's pretty well organized. Across the top, you'll basically have all of the different formats for pictures that you have. So you have presets. Presets probably a better word. Presets for mobile, so iPhones and things like that. Presets for websites. Presets for print. Presets for film and video. So you have a lot of presets here that you can work with, which is great. And will make it easy for you to go in and pick the size that makes sense for you. So if you're doing something for video, you can pick one of these. There's also all of these free templates you can download too, which is pretty nice. So you can use any one of these as kind of like places to get started, which is cool. And you can download any of these just by clicking on it, and then they'll show up, which is super nice. And you have art and illustration and things like that. But basically, once you select a size, so if I choose this iPhone, for example, then I'll see this section over here with the different options for our content. So I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see that. Now you'll have height and width, and this is measured in pixels, but you can also switch it to inches, millimeters, or centimeters, whatever you'd like to do. You also have picas and points, which are industry standard design sizes and things like that, but nothing you need to go into necessarily. So kind of like a standard iPhone, and a standard iPhone is set up in a portrait. So that means that it is taller than it is wide. So like a portrait picture you take of somebody, but you can also switch it to landscape just by clicking on this, and that will switch between the two different orientations you have here. You also have a bunch of advanced options like bleed and slug and things like that. Typically, if you're going to print, that's where you're going to be super concerned about these things. But we're just going to leave these as presets for now, and then we'll go ahead and hit create. And then it creates an artboard for us, where we can put our content. So if you want the content to be visible in the final output, you'll need to put it on the artboard that you're working with. So I'm just going to give you an idea of how that works. So with that out of the way, we're going to go ahead and take a look at interface real quick. So the interface is pretty easily set up here. So you have this left-hand side that has all of your different tools, and I'll zoom in over here so you can kind of see them. We'll be cycling between a few different tools today, but I want to make sure that you are aware that you have your different tools here. So the selection tool is how you click and drag to move things around. I'll go ahead and switch a document so you can see it. So click and drag to move things around with the selection tool. I can select this, move it around. I'm going to do that with the selection tool here. Other tools that we'll be using are the rectangle tool. And then we'll also be using the shape builder tool, and then maybe even the eraser tool here. Those will be the ones that we'll be focusing on today, but there's a lot of different options here and tons of kind of cool things to be accomplished with Illustrator. I'm going to kind of get you introduced really quickly to the basics, and we'll talk about image tracing, and yeah, that'll kind of be the game plan for today. So let's go ahead and get started with the rest of the interface. So I'm going to make sure that the selection tool is selected. The keyboard shortcut for that is V. That's the standard tool you're going to use to click and drag to move content around. So V is a nice shortcut to know. And it also works in Photoshop and InDesign as well. So if you know that trick there, you have it everywhere else. So next up is going to be our property section. So our properties is on the right hand side and will change based off of what we select. So you'll see that when I click on just the artboard, I have these rulers and grids and things like that. But if I click on an element in the artboard, then I'll get different options like appearance and size and opacity and things like that. And we'll kind of dig into all those in a little bit. But I want to make sure that you were aware of what they were and how they worked. But we'll kind of dive a little bit deeper here right now. Cool. So we're going to start with making some shapes. So really, when you're working in Illustrator, the big thing to know about Illustrator is that it's a vector-based program. So what does that mean? Vector-based artwork means that as opposed to things being made of individual pixels, they are made of lines and shapes. So we can use Illustrator to help us with those lines and create those lines and shapes. We're going to start by creating a square here. So there are lots of different ways to do it, but in my opinion, or at least my favorite way to do it, is by using the rectangle tool here. So in our toolbar on the left-hand side, the rectangle tool looks like this. So I can click and hold on this, and then I'll see all the other tools here. The reason why I knew I could click and hold on that is because if we zoom in really tightly, these little notches right here mean that there are additional tools available underneath that tool. So if I click and hold, I will see additional content. Cool. Hopefully that makes sense. And like I said, we're just going to go over some of the basics of Illustrator before we get into image tracing, just to make sure that when we start kind of manipulating some of the content in the image trace, you know kind of the things you can do to manipulate it. So I'm going to start by making this square. To create the square, click the rectangle tool, and then we're just going to draw out a box. So when I click and drag, if I move my mouse around, it will kind of move freely. If I want to kind of constrain the proportions and keep it a perfect square, all I have to do is hold down the Shift key while I click and drag. And that will create this box right here. Cool. So now that our box is created, these little buttons that are on the sides, these little guys, the white one, these blue one, the one in the center, they're called widgets. And widgets do different things. So with a widget, if I grab this widget on the top left-hand corner, I can click and drag to round the corners, which is pretty nice. And this happens with anything inside of this menu. These are all live shapes, which means that you can manipulate them after they've been placed. If you make a shape with the pen tool and things like that and create your own lines, it's a little bit harder to kind of round the corners easily. So I have that, and then I can grab these other widgets to, if I click in the center, this widget will allow me to move this around without switching to the selection tool, which is great. And then I have these outside widgets here. You've probably seen these before. I'm going to hold down the Shift key while I do this. This widget will allow me to scale up and scale down. And by the way, if you scale something way too big or way too small, you can always take Command. I'm on a Mac, so Command Z or Control Z on Windows to undo and step backwards. Kind of put this right where you want it. And then you can also move your tool to the outside and then rotate this guy around. So you can rotate the shape. Cool. Hopefully that makes sense. Let me know in the chat if you have any questions. I'll do my best to answer them. Cool. So next up, we'll talk about a triangle here real quick, and we'll move through these pretty quickly so we can get to image tracing a little faster. But this concept of like how you create things is important, I believe. So if we go to Polygon Tool, so the Polygon Tool will allow you to create any shape that's not a square or a circle, up to 11 sides. So if I click and hold, I'm going to hold down the Shift key so that it doesn't rotate on me. You'll see that I have a hexagon here, which isn't quite what I wanted, but that's okay. So once I hit this hexagon here, I'll see that I have widgets just like before, but there is one new widget that might be a little bit hard to see if you weren't looking for it. So this little button right here, it looks like a little diamond. And I'll zoom in a little bit more there. This little diamond right here. And you'll notice when you hover over it, you have the plus and minus here. If you click and drag up, that decreases the amount of sides. Click and drag down, it increases the amount of sides. So one of the reasons why I held down Shift when I created this guy is because if I don't hold down Shift when I create a new one, you'll see that it kind of spins around, right? As I kind of click and drag and move my mouse around. And when I let go, I have to hunt for that widget, which is on this corner over here. But if I hold down the Shift key when I create this thing, it will make it so that that widget is always on the right-hand side here. And then if I rotate it, that will rotate with that right-hand side. So I'll just grab the widget again here and kind of size it up, change the sides. Hopefully that makes sense. Cool. So now I'm going to go ahead and click on this guy. I'll kind of move it into place and I can scale it up all I want, but let's go ahead and make it a triangle first. So just move that widget and then I can hold down the Shift key to kind of scale it up, make it a little bit bigger, move it into place. This is just kind of a nice little exercise to create this triangle. Cool. Nice. Cool. All right. So then we can kind of repeat the process here, and you can go through and kind of rebuild these things. All of these files that I'll be using here, these first 4 or 5 initial ones, are available on Adobe's website, help.adobe.com, when you click on Illustrator. They have a bunch of different tutorials that have practice files like this for you to use and try out yourself, which is pretty nice. So now to create this circle here, we'll just grab the ellipse tool. So one interesting thing about the ellipse tool and the square tool is that when you click and drag initially, they click and drag and create the circle from the corner that you select. Then if you drag to the right, it will drag it down to the right. If you drag it up to the left, it will drag it out into the left. So that makes it so that you have to select kind of a corner where you want it and then move them. While you can always kind of reposition like this and kind of move things into place, one thing that I find with circles in particular is that I have a pretty good idea of where I want the center to be. So I would rather just kind of click and drag and create the circle from the center. The way that you can do that, if you're interested, is if you hold down the Option key or the Alt key on Windows while you have the circle tool selected, or the square tool, you can click and drag and that will create the circle from the center here. I'm also holding down the Shift key to maintain proportion so it's a perfect circle. If I wanted something that's more oblong, I can just click and drag without holding down Shift. Then it won't maintain that perfect circle there. Cool. Hopefully that makes sense. And then you can kind of go through and rinse and repeat and build out these shapes over here if that was something you were interested in. But you can get a lot done just with these simple shapes here in Illustrator. So let me know if you have any questions. Moving on though, we're going to talk really quickly about creating, we're going to talk about combining shapes. So with Illustrator, you can take less complex shapes and make more complex shapes with them. So our goal is to kind of create this little icon right here. I have a couple of different shapes kind of preset to do this, and we're going to use this little tool over here, and I'll zoom in just so it's easier to see for a second. This guy, let's see if I can find it. This guy right here called the Shape Builder tool. So the Shape Builder tool is a way to combine shapes in Illustrator. It is not the way to do it. There are plenty of options available to you. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in here just a little bit so you can kind of see this area that we're working with.